Okay, recording, no pressure.
No
Um,
pressure.
that's right. I'll try to avoid using your name and your occupation and all those things,
Geographical area.
geographical area. So basically, I had talked about doing this back after the election, and in some ways, kind of wish I had these
Yeah,
conversations with people back then
it's very different
when
now, right?
very different now. And also just when things were a little bit more fresh for you in
Yes.
terms of like your reasoning for voting for Trump. And so now it's been what, almost 4 or 5 months since election. And there's a lot that's happened since then. So
Yep.
I think the first question, then we'll get into a little bit of history, or maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't taint the interview with this question first. But how are you feeling about how things are right now?
Um, I want to say disappointed, but I am also not totally surprised. I think I had hopes, as I do when making decisions of things working. Um, the word working is not correct. Of things progressing in a smoother fashion that is more um, speaks to the audience in a way that reaches them better. And that has not been achieved. I think the messaging is really poor. Um, but I mean, it's not like he hasn't been a president before. And we all remember kind of the sort of chaotic um, sense of the state that we all felt, I think, in that time. Maybe not all. I will speak for myself. Um, I'm not sure if you're asking this question. Do I regret my decision? I don't think so, frankly. Um, do I wish things would progress differently still, given the circumstances? Yes. Um, I think we had two poor options, and I chose the better option given what at the time, and actually, I would argue even to this day, feels like the most pressing issue on the table, even while the current sort of chaos uh, is circulating around different topics and different points of discussion and what's being circulated on social media and whatever. I think these are all different issues that aren't necessarily distracting from what's quote really happening. I think that verbiage is not accurate. I think people say that a lot as if there's like some conspiracy theory happening out there. But what I would say is that these points of conversation are um, they are important and they need to be discussed. But I still believe that the most urgent and biggest issue is still the same.
Hmm.
Um,
Um,
that was a little jumbo,
mhm.
but maybe once you ask more questions, things will start piecing together.
Yeah, yeah. Um, because that's a good point. I've talked to other people, who voted for Trump, and I'm like, can you just let me know as a favor when, at what point, if you ever experience remorse or regret, like when that
Uh,
happens. And
when
I
and
think
if, yeah,
when and if that happens, yeah. I mean, it's a tough question because like it can be a gradual thing. It can be like for me with Trump, it wasn't until like I never voted for him in the first term, and I really did not like him, and but for me it was January 6th, right? And so that was the point where I was like, okay, this is the point where I can't. It goes from I'm not supporting him, or I wish he would kind of go away to, okay, I don't I don't see him as viable anymore, and I don't think he should be anywhere near like the mechanisms of power, right? And but for other people, that occurred way even before me. So I understand that there's a gradual, there's a spectrum, and also while we're in the throes of it, only a couple months into his second term, like that's a tough question to answer. So, but we can.
Yeah,
What I was really interested
sorry, I
in.
was just
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
Zoom. I was just going to also echo that. I also did not like him, and I did not vote for him the first round. I'm not
Mhm,
sure if you remember that. Um, and I did vote for Biden um, the first round. So
mhm.
this was a switch.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
it's been a
go
switch,
ahead.
period, though, right? Because you voted Democrat your whole
Yeah,
life, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, can I share where you're from, like originally? Not
Yeah,
Dallas area. So you're a Texan,
uh-huh.
Dallas Texan, and but you voted Democrat your whole life, and was that for presidential, or was that for local, or all up and down the ballot?
Pretty much all up and down the ballot, but I will say I wasn't totally politically inclined. Um, I think the last 8 years have been a shift for the population as a whole, but I wasn't really paying attention to local elections as much.
Mhm.
Um, Not totally proud of that, but it just, I think because every president that came into power, things just sort of like they ran smoothly more or less, like people had opposing views about things, but it was sort of it was the same thing over and over again, is what it felt like. And it
Yeah,
wasn't until um, Trump came into power that things got really mixed up. And ever since then, I think everybody has been more politically inclined.
yeah,
But to answer your question, yes, it was Democratic pretty much all the way.
yeah. What were the main issues that you cared about when you would vote
Previously,
previously? Yeah.
I was in college when Obama ran, and
Mm.
Clinton came and spoke at our school in favor of him, obviously. So did Michelle and a number of other people. I mean, I was in college, and um, I would say I had more of a bleeding heart at the time, and social issues were pressing for me. Um, and I, I think that I was always of the mindset that like we can always do better. We can always be, for everybody and try to make a space for everybody. All the organizations that I've been a part of, including this leadership camp for juniors in high school that's sponsored by Rotary, was always on a mission sort of to, um, yes, inclusivity mattered, but also just like making sure that people understood that everyone had a voice and that they were important in whatever sort of domain they were in. We were all leaders from different um, domains within high school, so whether they were leaders on the football team or um, on student council or in their musical um, spaces, um, there was a place for everybody. And it was always impressed in that organization. And then also just in general, I really adopted that mentality that like we should work to, have a diverse community that is inclusive and works towards the betterment of all people.
Mhm.
So with that very basic concept in mind, I think that I always operated um, from that perspective when voting.
Mhm. Okay. Do you see Trump as antithetical to that or not?
I think that Um, there's so much in that question. Because first, I think I've grown up and I see pressing issues very differently at this point in my
Mm,
life. Um, and also just globally, I think the world is a different place right now. So
okay.
that's one thing. The second thing I think is that um, I do think that Trump is misunderstood to a certain degree. I
Mm,
think that has to do with the fact that he sucks at communicating in a way that reaches an audience well. Like you can say one thing, you can be critical of a person, or you can have a piece of advice, and you can say it can be the complete like 100% accurate depiction of a situation. Um, but when conveying it to a person, they would either receive it or not receive it based on the way that you communicate it.
mm,
I mean, I think that every piece of education and like relationships forming and preserving is all about that. It's all about communication and how you're able to meet a person and have them be able to receive communication or receive a critique or whatnot, even in the workplace, you know? And so I think he does a poor job at that. Clearly, he has a different agenda because he's just trying, it appears to me that he tries to sort of more encourage his um, voters, I suppose, versus trying to bring everyone to the table. So I guess to answer your question, perhaps it is antithetical. Um, but I do think also that he has made choices that are still aligned with the perspective of helping people who are in need. Um, there's so much in that question.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, we could
So
segue in so many different directions. Yeah.
yeah. So you mentioned that you felt like he was the better option of the two. Is there someone else who, and this is also a tough question, but are there other people who could have run as Democrats who you might have preferred over Trump? That's
I think if Michelle Obama ran, I probably would have voted for her.
okay. So it's not
I
like that
didn't
Trump was your.
see, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's not that you saw Trump as your ideal candidate, even it was just that you saw
No.
him as the best for the things that we are confronting domestically and abroad.
Yeah, and to clarify also, I didn't make the decision for Trump until like the last, I don't know, 2 weeks before the election.
Mm,
I think the majority of the population had their minds made like months before. I've heard people comment. I remember visiting DC actually. Um, I believe it was in July. It was in the summertime, and someone that I met that weekend had made the comment that they believe that most people have already made up their minds. Like, who didn't make up their mind already? It was such a
mm,
blanket state, like such a definitive statement, and everybody in the room seemed to be in agreement with that statement. And I thought, like, I mean, I'm not, I'm not decided. Um, and I tried to do my due diligence and like researching and reading and listening to all the millions of podcasts that they both tried to um, that they both were on in the last like I don't know 3 weeks or so before the election. And it wasn't until then that I made a decision. Um, it was tough because I wanted her to be someone that I wanted to vote for, and I didn't. I did not want to vote for her. It
mm,
was not. I didn't think it was the right choice,
mm,
and I still stand by that. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, and so Kamala didn't do enough to win your vote, basically.
Not that, not only did she not do enough, I don't think she's the right person.
Mm,
I don't think she was the right person for the job.
yeah.
You know, I'll explain this. Before the election, one of the things that helped seal the deal was based off of a personal experience in my workplace, um, which is that my boss can, be a very stereotypical boss. And like traditionally, like there are anecdotes of him turning purple, being angry at particular situations, and you sort of just have to digest that, and it would be so annoying, so irritating. Um, but like and then on the opposite side of the spectrum, I had to start working with a client, a woman who represented our client, um, who apparently had, I don't know, has like 10 more years of experience than I do, and has, the pedigree, and has all this experience, from previous jobs and whatnot. And I started to work with her, and I was losing my mind working with her because it was just not effective, not efficient. Just so many frustrations on my end working with this person who apparently had all this experience and, supposedly so knowledgeable about these things. And all I was experiencing was like, does this person have amnesia? Like I, I can't, there's communication is poor. There's like no documentation on their end, very disorganized. Like, in so many ways, just like so frustrating to work with. Um, and my boss, on the other hand, was very frustrating to work with for different reasons. He was an asshole, for lack of a better way of putting it, um, and continues to be at various points. However, he is self-aware and he communicates differently at different times, but he has these moments where he could turn purple and because he gets angry about a situation, and it's very frustrating to work with him. Um, but he knows the industry. Do I trust him to run the company and run it successfully? Absolutely. Like hands down. Um, it's kind of like choose your battle. And that's personally for me, I could not help but draw some relationship to what was happening in the country at large. And it helped me solidify my decision because to me, it's like, do I even like this person? No. Do I respect him and trust that he's gonna like make the hard call, maybe be the asshole when he needs to be? Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so it sounds like you trust, yeah, despite his temperament, you trust that he is a better person for the moment, will make the hard decision versus someone who is a little bit more palatable, demeanor wise, and personality and kind, but you're unsure of their ability to actually run things and lead. So I guess I would wonder if it wasn't Kamala and it wasn't Michelle, who is, you would enjoy a Michelle Obama candidate, right? You voted for Biden the first time when he ran against Trump, so, after Trump's first term. If Biden was running again, would you have voted for him
No, absolutely not.
for
They're
some of the
both
same reasons?
doormats. They're both doormats. And they don't I think I believe it was Brene Brown who sort of filled in the sentences that were not spoken on her podcast because it felt like she was really trying to advocate for the Democratic Party. And so she was like filling in the lines like with her opinions,
Mm,
which has its merit, sure. But in any case, she made the comment. I don't remember exactly, but it was something to the effect of an organization being led successfully by someone who really leans on the people in the organization. And there's something to be said about that. I do agree with that for sure. You build strong companies with um, those on staff who are also equally capable and leaders in their own respects. So I I do agree with that statement. However, I do still think that the leader should be the leader, like that they should be able to have some kind of presence. And I feel like all of this is sort of like going around in circles to what I actually at the time and still feel is the critical issue at hand, which is World War III, in my personal
Mm,
opinion. I
okay.
think that World War III is, and maybe I'm being dramatic. I don't know. But it just feels like we are on the precipice of that. And all the world powers are sort of like shifting and taking their cues from each other, and all the world wars that are happening, or everything feels like it's inching towards this like moment. And did I feel um, that Trump would be able to handle that pressure versus our other options? Yeah, I did. And um, like because precisely because he is a bulldog. And yeah, I at the time I heard this other commentary from I believe it was Lex Friedman. I don't remember who he was talking to, but he asked the question, do you believe that monsters can only be beat by monsters? And that was really enlightening to me because my gut reaction is yes. Do I think that there could be alternate ways? Possibly. But for this moment in time, Trump felt like the right fit, even for that reason.
Mhm. So
And
that
does
was
that sound awful? Possibly. Like that might sound crazy, but
no, I don't think
I
that
think it's
sounds
a little realistic.
crazy. But that was the biggest thing that was top of mind for you. It was
Yeah.
a global conflict where in the past you have been moved to vote for Democrats because of sensitivity to inclusivity, and that was a main driver for you previously. And since then, over the last 10 years or so, 15 years, especially after COVID, the global geopolitical landscape feels to you like it's inching closer to a global conflict. And you think when you looked at Kamala and you looked at Trump, neither of those were ideal to you, but you felt like Trump, if there were a global conflict, it sounds like you're saying you trusted Trump to handle it or to
Hmm.
not get us to that point or maybe to avoid it.
Both, all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, granted, like obviously there are other reasons too. It's not a totally isolated perspective, but I will say that that was the biggest concern for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it doesn't matter all the other things, right? Like inclusivity is great, but who cares if there's a global conflict and we're going to get squashed by another.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, who cares sounds a little flippant. It's not that. Like obviously those things matter, but also some of the things that are being defined as caring these days is a little bit skewed, and I feel a little bit different from what that meant years ago. I think that on top of all this too, I do think that there's been like the mindset of the Democratic Party is a little bit different. I don't think it means the same thing these days. Um, not that it's com I think some people argue that it's completely flipped on its head. I don't totally think that, but um, yeah, I disagree with the ways in which they've like really shifted gears as well. Um, but to answer your question, that was the heaviest issue on my mind.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then some of the other things like that so biggest thing, issue on your mind was geopolitical conflict. Some other things that he talked about, like reducing the size of government or making it more efficient. Um, Immigration was a big one for him. Were either of those also reasons that
For
you?
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think the whole immigration topic is really tricky for me, because my parents immigrated to this country. They did immigrate legally. However, at the time, they were part of communist country and they escaped, quote, illegally. Um, I mean, one successfully and one unsuccessfully. And then she left successfully, my mother, via proper protocols through a visa, but then had to renounce her citizenship. And anyway, that's all to say that um, they had to be received by other countries after their illegal attempts in order to be able to arrive to America
Mhm.
like legally and successfully.
Seeking
So,
asylum.
yes, I don't remember exactly the terminology for like, sorry, I have to migrate to my room. One moment, please. Um, yes, seeking asylum. Um, so those countries did for them what people here might argue America should or could be doing for the mass population that was trying to escape. Um, I do think very different circumstances, but nevertheless, that could be argued. Um, but it was getting out of hand. I think
Mhm.
everyone agrees with that. Everybody knows that it was getting out of hand, the immigration at the time.
Mhm.
Um, I don't I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I think that it's a sensitive topic because it's really heartbreaking even now seeing videos of people having to leave and the ridiculous other issues at hand now with the green card stuff. Like it's really silly. Um, but but yeah, I would say immigration was critical for everybody, and you saw how um, Kamala flipped her um, position on that as well during the running. And then um, you mentioned immigration, and what was the other comment?
Reducing size of government and government efficiency.
Yeah, I listened to an Andrew Schultz podcast recently, and I think he phrased it pretty well, which is that like I don't think anyone would argue with the desire to make government more efficient and effective and to reduce costs. Like I think that's a desirable goal for everybody too. Um, but the way that they're doing it and the commentary, like some of the things that Elon says, even it's like really silly and the whole thing is very aggressive. I mean, these people were so accustomed to uh, really flipping companies around. Um, there, there's the question of like, is government a company? Like, is it feasible to run a government as a company? Does that make sense? Where does it make sense? Where doesn't it make sense? Um, because the ramifications are pretty harsh. Just because someone loses a job, does that mean it's a bad decision? I don't think so necessarily. Um, I don't know the details personally of all of the organizations that have been closed off. I know the Department of Education has recently been closed down, but or is proposed to. I don't know any of the details on that front, frankly. Um, I'd like to learn more. Um, but yeah, I wish communication could be better. I appreciate the transparency. I will say that. I think it's great that we are aware that there are true inefficiencies. Do I think some of those the commentary, like, is it being exaggerated in some of the articles and media that's coming out about it? I think so. Um, but efficiency of government was not a prime concern during the election.
Mhm. Okay.
I will say, yeah, the prospect of World War III was the heaviest. Immigration certainly was up there. Government efficiency wasn't really on my mind or radar really
Mhm. Okay. So
at the time.
the ability to confront a global conflict or avoid one, securing the borders, and would you say there was a third one issue that was important to you when you decided who to vote for?
Just like I suppose in opposition of the Biden Kamala ballot, like their inability to do stuff, to
Mhm.
be present in the public. Like I have no idea what, maybe this is my own ignorance. I didn't do enough research, but I have no idea what Kamala did the last
Mhm.
4 years. That's very possible, my own ignorance, and
Mhm.
I should do more research on that for sure. Um,
Well, I think that was
yeah,
the sticky part for a lot of people was early on in Biden's administration. They kind of touted her as the borders are, and then that just went terribly. And she was doing some interviews, but they weren't being received well, and she was actually polling less. Like her popularity was going down with the more interviews she gave, and so she kind of disappeared for a couple of years. And I think for me as well, that was a gripe that when Biden decided to run, and then they decided not to like to convince him to step down, and so there wouldn't be a primary, and then they kind of foisted Kamala, and that was like our choice. It was a little disheartening to me as well because I was like you know, um, she hadn't been around. She had been kind of just disappeared, and then suddenly she was on the scene, and we were supposed to kind of rally behind her and like her. So maybe I'm saying too much myself, but what you're saying,
no, I,
yeah,
yeah.
sounds familiar to what I observed and then what I've heard others say as well. And there have been some other people who have said similar things about like there should have been a primary, right? And do you think if there
Yes.
was that that would have changed maybe your approach as well?
I mean, yeah, like I told you, I probably would have voted for Michelle. I think I told you earlier that the um, Kamala's probably very good at her job before. As judge, I don't know really about her history. I think people are can be very good leaders at different scales. I don't think that she was fit for the presidency. Like the argument that Brene Brown made about leaning on your advisors, yes, but I do think there's such a thing as someone who's the leader of a country to lean that much on your advisors. Like you can't even speak a word because you don't know what's going to come out of her mouth, you know?
Mm,
Like I think someone in that position needs to be able to say something and say it definitively and confidently and actually have it make sense. Like people can stand
mm,
behind that. And like yeah, absolutely we need to move in that direction. And um I say that coming from a person who I think like being self-aware, I think that I too am a strong leader at a smaller scale. I don't know, I wouldn't be able to like run something at that large of a scale to be able to say something on the flip of a dime and for that to be like a confident, wise choice forward or direction forward. Like I'm not saying this as like the definition of Trump either, right? Like I'm not saying like on the flip of a dime, whatever Trump says is like the wise choice. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Mm,
I'm just saying like as it relates to Kamala, I just did not trust that like she would be able to like confidently direct the country in a positive direction. Um,
mm,
like imagining her on her own in a room with Xi Jinping and Putin, just like I just it's unfortunately it's very possible also that it's a bit of a boys club situation too. Um, it's I hate to say it, but that is very possibly part of that perception. I don't know.
mm.
Anyway,
Yeah. So, you referenced Brene Brown a couple of times. Was it a podcast that she was on that talked about?
Kamala
Uh,
Kamala was on her podcast.
oh, okay. Kamala was on. Okay. And so
It was
the topic of conversation was it around leadership and how Kamala leans on her advisors?
um the Brene Brown interview happened very late in the game, and I think it was a, an effort against the Trump Joe Rogan podcast
Mhm.
because Brene Brown has such a following, and Brene Brown is known to be a speaker on a number of things, but among them, uh, empathetic leadership.
Mhm.
Um, and so she's given all of her research and knowledge and experience, she then can be a voice as to what good leadership means. I think that was
Mhm.
the goal,
Okay.
right? And so then it positioned Kamala in a space where, like, no, she's actually the better leader here, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Which, like,
Did
I have so much respect for Brene Brown. I love her. So, um, again, I agreed with that statement, but I do think there's such a thing as too much leaning,
mhm.
um, especially in the position of the leader of the world, basically.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it sounds like
yeah,
you want a decisive leader who takes counsel from their advisors and people around them. But at the end of the day, buck stops with you, and you have to make a decision at some point.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that's why I was saying, like, I think Michelle has more of a spine in that sense, but also I just appreciate the way she thinks through information and communicates. And I just don't think it's the same story with Kamala,
Mhm.
unfortunately. I wanted her so badly to be that way. That's why I kept listening to the podcast. So I kept waiting for her to like show up in a different way. I think one of
Mhm.
the last debates she did very well. I don't know if
Mhm.
you remember that, but I was like, oh wow, okay, maybe like she can pull through. But
Mhm.
I just felt like time and time again, she like proved for herself like why she would be a great candidate.
Mhm. Yeah, I
I was
mean that's
disappointed by it for sure.
yeah. I mean that's the reason we have debates and interviews because we're
Mhm.
making an assessment of these people who are trying to earn and win our vote. And I think that it's a little cynical when in a two-party system, it's just like, well, this guy's so bad, like I'm the only viable choice, and that alone can turn a lot of people off. But is there anything? One, would you vote for Trump a third time?
No, I mean, I would hope that there's always hope for someone better. I
Yeah.
just, I mean, that's such a hard question to answer. Like, who's he running against? Like,
Mhm.
um,
Well,
I
plus
would
the
think,
term limits, he would have to constitutionally change or
oh
like,
my gosh, like,
yeah.
I am not a person who goes down the conspiracy train very easily, but um, yeah, so it's that's I didn't desire to vote for Trump. I felt like I had to vote with my best foot forward as best as I could, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. What do the Democrats need to do to win your vote back?
I think what's unfortunate about this era um, is that the pendulum swings so hard in response to things. And I think that's partially why I've been not disappointed. Again, like I said at the beginning, it's like it's not a total surprise. I just wished that communication uh, and behaviors would be made, more mild, such that it sort of like could make the argument like, see, like we're trying to do things the right way now. But
Mm,
I think that people can be really childish, even as experienced as we get and as quote mature and wise as we become. We have our base instincts still, I think. So that being said, I I just I would be surprised but very uh grateful if we had someone that came around who was more mild mannered from either party.
mm,
That was not so swinging with their freaking everything they had to like push left or push right. Like I am more moderate, I am more center in my political views. So that would be my preference. That is what it would take for a more
mm.
mild Democratic candidate who has just is rational um, about things, like doesn't, yeah. The left agenda is became pretty intense, I feel like. And
Mm.
so,
I'm gonna
yeah, I
rattle.
would say a more moderate candidate.
Okay.
Hmm.
I'm going to rattle off a list of names who, at this moment in time, from the left on the Democrat side, are folks who maybe look like they're gearing up to maybe make some sort of bid. Um,
Hmm.
you have Pete Buttigieg, you have Gavin Newsom, you have Bernie Sanders, you have AOC, and I'm sure there's others, but out of any of those names, would any of those people be enticing to you? In because I mean, Trump shouldn't be able to run for a third term at this point. He's prohibited. But say it's like a JD Vance, or for some, God forbid, it is Trump again. But do any of those people sound enticing?
You're saying there'd be no other Republican candidate on the table?
Oh, I'm talking about from the left. If any of those
Okay,
left,
so just like, yeah, and being enticing. No, the answer is no. None of those sound enticing to me,
yeah.
unfortunately. Um, yeah, I think it's interesting that some of the people who were more moderate left um, have shifted over to the Republican Party too.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that's my answer.
All right. Well, Um, current trajectory, I think we're probably coming up on, it's not showing me the time. I think we've probably been talking for like 40 minutes now.
Eight 8:30.
Is there any do you have any parting thoughts around Trump's presidency? What compelled you to vote for him? How things are going now? What's your prediction for the future? What you hope he avoids or steers clear of?
Lots of questions there. I feel like all the thoughts race to my head at the same time and also not at all at the same time. Um, I suppose in terms of hopes, we can part on a positive. I hope that the the dramatic choices that have riled up a lot of stirred up a lot of concerns and conversations around government and the future of the states, um, that that it's not that doesn't become just a talking point of like I told you so's or um, ultimately that it doesn't become more and more polarizing. I hope that he and Vance both could find um, a communication specialist, or that they would find ways to communicate in a way that would bring everyone to the table. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't know. It makes me sad. Um, I suppose I don't have a good answer for you. I would have to think about it longer, and I could send you a response in terms of any any parting thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a tough question. I guess, like what he's doing right now with the defying judgment, judges' decisions or rulings, or how he's, the conflicts he's getting with law firms, or, any of those things,
Yeah, thanks for making more specific. I think I think that he's perpetually trying to find how government can operate as a company because that is what he knows and that is what he's known for. And in his methods, he was very aggressive and would cut out anything that he perceived as weeds, and he would be very aggressive in that effort. And I think he's trying to do the same thing with government, which I do think has some validity, but he's not approaching it um, more, I want to say mindfully. I don't know if that is accurate. You can't necessarily say that about a person, but I just wish he took a little more time to assess certain situations before he hopped onto these decisions that would then cause the ramifications of the lawsuits and the judge's decisions on the like it's just all happening so fast and everything all at once. And um, because of that, I don't think the wisest decisions are being made. Um, that then has the domino effects that it does. Um, I wonder if that has to do with the fact that it's a 4-year term and he's trying to get so much done and prove to the people that he's doing the things that he said he was going to do, and or if it's just his way and that's just how he perpetually is. I don't know. Um, I've never, I've alluded to this earlier. I don't particularly like him. I I chose him for those specific reasons at the time, and I made the best decision I perceived to be on the
Hmm.
table, and I don't regret it for those reasons. Are there frustrations? Yes. I'm not surprised by the fact that there are frustrations because I didn't like him in the first term
Hmm.
either. That's why I voted for Biden. But yeah, two bad choices.
Hmm. So when he defies the court orders, the judge's orders, and he says, "Oh, I'm just doing what people voted for me to do," uh, would you prefer that he didn't defy court
Obviously. Yeah.
orders?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if I end up in a camp, I hope you remember me. Just kidding.
Wow, you're like on the deep end in terms of like what you think of will happen in the future. What are your thoughts? You just
Um,
asked me a lot of questions.
yeah. I mean, my thoughts are that he is goes beyond being a strong man and that he is very fragile. And when you have someone who's that fragile at the helm and who has control of the mechanisms of power, all kinds of things can go sideways from his fragility and like even being up late at night and talking about thinking about who people who he felt wronged him, in the past administration. Like those are the things that keeps him up at late at night. And it's not
Yeah.
thinking about the American people or how to improve our lives. It's, oh, who wronged me and who
Yeah.
can I, you know?
Yeah.
So that's,
Character. I don't think he has
mhm,
great character.
yeah. So my fear is that he, uh, at worst, he's, you know, too cozy with Putin and, really doesn't actually have America's interests at heart. I think best case scenario is he's kind of just a kind of a an idiot who just doesn't recognize like the how he doesn't recognize the complexity and how interconnected the country is and doesn't realize that if you change this one thing over here, it has drastic disproportionate outcome over here and in a way that being a real estate mogul in New York it's a very big ecosystem, but it's still contained and it's still not as
Mm-hmm.
interconnected as like our country's
Mm-hmm.
programs and so that's and I think yeah, and I think worst case also is he wants to try to make the midterms an issue over amending the Constitution so that he can run for a third term. So those are my concerns,
Wow.
like my immediate concerns. Yeah, just
Interesting.
me. Yeah. And Elon,
Yeah.
oh,
I mean, mhm.
anyway, I could go on about Elon. What were you gonna say?
I hear you. Um, I don't remember what I was gonna say. I mean, yes, I do remember. It just that like you, I think, pay a great deal of attention to all of this. Um, I since the election followed the news, but I don't like deep dive and consider what would be an alternate solution necessarily. There's a lot of other life things that are happening for me, so it's
Yeah.
yeah, I haven't been sitting in those questions as much as you
Hmm.
have, I think.
Yeah.
It did come up actually in this morning's leadership meeting, this topic of um, keeping people out of the country who have a green card.
Mm.
Um, I haven't done any research um, on this question, but it was brought up in this morning's meeting as a potential concern for the office because we have a pretty diverse uh, group of people who travel
Mm.
home frequently
Mm.
to their respective countries. And um, it's just something that the office is being aware of as like something to keep in mind as we do travel, work, whether it's for work or personal
Yeah.
needs, and being able to be accessible to the company if something were to happen. I haven't done any research. I don't know what this is about, or um, but it came up, so it's just
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, I hope that we avoid World War III, and
Hmm.
that's a big takeaway. And second big takeaway is that Democrats need to run Michelle Obama in the next presidential election, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, against these other guys.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you'll get anything out of my responses. I think I was a lot more seeped in those conversations at the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
No,
I
it's helpful.
literally just walked into the house, so my brain is kind of scattered
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
the workday.
No, I appreciate it. I don't know how I'll post the interview, but maybe I'll just make a reel of it. Maybe I'll condense it down to like 20 minutes or something. But
Or little bits, yeah.
yeah. So, all right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate. Thanks for
Good
taking the
luck.
time. Yep. And yeah,
Thank you.
we'll talk more later.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right.
Bye.
Bye.